The History of Things podcast is brought to you by HistoryNet, publisher of 9 different historical magazines, including the Civil War Times, American History, and Military History. Visit HistoryNet.com to learn more, or follow them on social media by searching for @history_net. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoy the show.
Are you ready?
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the History Things podcast. I am your co-host, Pat McGuire. Joining me here in the War Department studios, as always, is my co-host with the most. You guys all know him. You love him. Well, some of you love him. Some of you heard what he said about you last season and maybe started to go away. But most of you love him. Everybody has read all of his books. Author, historian, park ranger, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Matt Borders. Matty B, how you been, bud?
Not bad, buddy. I hope everybody's reading the books.
They're definitely reading the books. It's me. I'm doing all the downloads, doing all the buying at Barnes & Noble, bud.
Fine.
It's one-man support. No, I'm just kidding. Anything new? We're deep into season 4 at this point. Anything new midsummer? About book front? You got book 8 now, book 9 at this point. Where are we at?
4 should be coming out.
4.
Yep.
Right. What's coming out at this point?
This will be Face of Union Soldiers at Gettysburg Culp's Hill.
Ooh, specifically Culp's Hill.
Specifically Culp's Hill.
That sounds like
Corps.
That sounds like you're breaking this down into a sub-series.
Possibly. We'll see.
Wink. Well, we've had an action-packed season 4 so far, and we're going to be chugging right along here with a special guest in studio. You know how we love to get people in the room to chat. That's why we built this room, to have people in it to chat.
That's right.
No shade thrown at our Zoom guests, though. Sometimes we just can't get across the country to talk to you.
That's right.
But we had a guest last season on our show, Mr. Dana Shove, who was the managing editor in print for HistoryNet. Mm-hmm. And I guess he just inherited a new title. In addition to being the editor for Civil War Times magazine, he's also the editor for American History magazine, correct, I believe. So sweet. I met him at Fort Frederick, if you remember from the first episode we did with Dana, and it was kind of this fortuitous, holy crap, we all just crashed into each other. There was another person there when we all met at the fort, and we're very excited because she joins us now in studio. Ladies and gentlemen, the director of photography for HistoryNet, Melissa Winn. Welcome to the History Things podcast. How are you?
Great. I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and talk with you guys.
I'm pumped. Was it as weird for you as it was for Dana when we met at Fort Frederick?
Did he make it awkward?
It was a little odd, yes. We both were like, wait, I think I know him.
We all know
him.
each other.
Yes,
this community is full of those interactions everywhere.
It does happen quite often.
So
yes.
Tell us a little bit about you. Let's start with what you do for HistoryNet, and then tell us a little bit about just how you got into history. I always like to kind of find out how people engaged with this subject and stayed with it for their lifetime. So
your history origin story.
Yeah, as the nerds, as the comic book nerds, what's your origin story? But let's start with HistoryNet. What do you do for HistoryNet?
Sure. At HistoryNet, I am the director of photography, so we do have a photo research department. We like to say the photos in the magazine are as much a part of the story, if not more. People really like to look at pictures.
Yes.
As the text.
Worth 1,000 words.
Absolutely. So we're very meticulous about researching the correct photographs, the time periods, the artifacts, all of that. And so we have a photo research department. I am the head of that. I specifically work on the research for the Civil War titles. We have 2 of them, Civil War Times and American Civil War. Mm-hmm. And I work on American History magazine as well.
So you got to hang out with Dana a lot.
I do hang out with Dana quite a bit.
Oh, man, no.
It's good. He's fun. So
what is so on the spot? What do you have a project that is like, I love this project? Does it stand out as something that's like I love working on this, or do you have like a Bane project? Like tell us about something that is kind of sort of focused for you right now. Do you have one particular? If people ask you something, tell us about what you work on. Do you have one particular picture you go to, or one adventure in researching a picture that you go to?
To talk about?
Yeah.
Not really. I mean, I would say Yeah, I mean, what I love about the job is, you know, like I was talking a little bit earlier with you guys about how I run a lot. And,
Yeah.
you know, so, you know, we have a story coming up in the next issue coming up. And it's just, you know, I was running and I was listening to these audiobooks by Caroline Janey. She does the great courses. And I was listening to it, and it was talking, you know, who fought the Civil War? Was it a rich man's war and a poor man's fight? And I was, you know, I thought, wow, this is really interesting, and talked to Dana about it. You know, we got to get this in the magazine. This is a great story. You know, who fought the Civil War? Because it's not what you think it is. You know. Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't want to give it away.
Yes, I don't spoil it. Like, go read the book. Go read the book.
But, you know, it's like something sparks my interest, and then, you know, we kind of go with it. I'm working, you know, we're working right now with some people. I'm originally from Wisconsin.
All right.
And, you know, some researchers up there who collect photographs. And over the summer, I went back to Wisconsin and saw his collection. He's got a big room full of photographs and just amazing stories of Civil War soldiers and officers from Wisconsin that fought in the Civil War. And
we can relate to that, just getting excited about something and deciding we're doing an episode about it.
Absolutely.
So
yeah,
we
I
can relate
bet.
to that.
That's my favorite thing about the job. Very early on, we started doing. I started doing this thing called Hump Day History, which is this Wednesday history story, and it really just is sparked from me doing photo research and saying, "Oh my God, you know, did you guys know this?" You know, and
that's the best way to spread history.
You know,
just
Dana
getting
would be
excited.
like, "Put it up on Facebook." So you know, we kind of started this thing, and that's my favorite thing about it. Everywhere I go, there's some story, and they're just these little tidbits about, you know, a bigger story. People know the big theme, but they don't know the little stories, and I love those little stories.
And getting excited about it is the key, because if you're not excited, people will not get excited.
Right,
So
right.
if
Yes.
you are busting at the seams to tell these stories, then, you know, people will bust at the seams to listen to them by default. So that's very cool.
Yes, yes.
How did you get into history? Like as a young kid, you know, later in life, how did you just find yourself on the path to being a nerd like all of us?
So honestly, when I was in grade school, I was a super big Abraham Lincoln nerd.
Nothing wrong with that.
I absolutely
Respect. He's on
loved
my
Abraham
shelf right
Lincoln.
here.
Yep, he was
my guy.
my favorite president. I always, you know, tell the story about how 16 was like my lucky number because he was the 16th president.
Okay.
I won a cakewalk on the number 16. I thought, of course, this is it. You know.
All right.
I've had some other big things happen on the 16th, and my son was born on the 16th. So.
Okay. So there's a lifetime of the
Yes.
dice rolling for you.
Uh-huh.
Okay, that's good.
So I
It
was
works
always,
out.
Yeah, really interested in Abraham Lincoln. I did every report in school on him. And then, but really, I went to school. I was really into art and photography and writing, just all the creative aspects of life, I guess. So
Yes.
I went into journalism and studied English, and I studied art in college, and spent a lot of. I mean, I worked for a while as a reporter. Then I kind of got part-time for a while because I had 3 kids, which took up a lot of time. And,
I know that part. Yep.
yeah, so I only worked part-time for about 10 years and got back into full-time writing again. And this job came up about 7 or 8 years ago, I guess now, on and I read this, I remember reading the ad online. It was, history, writing, research, photos. I'm like, I remember turning to my husband and saying, why can't I get this job? And he's like, well, you won't get it if you don't apply.
Good
So,
husband. Boom.
Nice.
Good move.
So
That's
I
the right
applied,
move.
and they definitely put me through the ringer. I think I went through 4 interviews.
Wow.
And a written phone interviews, I had to come with a test, photo research test.
Hey, that's awesome.
To it. And,
Survival of the fittest, and you were the fittest.
Most
It was.
definitely.
It was very cool. And
Very awesome.
I'll never forget Dana saying, this is Civil War all the time.
Like
you
no
know?
breaks, no
And I
breaths,
was
never
like,
coming up
bring
for
it
air.
on. Okay, I'm ready. So.
Is tonight's subject your favorite? Like I asked you about research projects. Is this your favorite history to talk about? Like this guy and his friend, or is this just something that you've grown to really like to tell professionally? Like it's just through a researching, or is this like a lifetime of I like this guy and
This
and
is
this story's grown?
absolutely one of my favorite topics to
Yes.
talk about.
All
Yes.
right.
Excellent.
That's awesome. That bodes well for the History Things podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not Lincoln, though. That's
It
interesting.
is not Lincoln, no.
I was getting ready to toss a.
I
was
like Lincoln a lot, but
I was going to say it's
and
about.
I actually always kind of say, this is like my new, my new favorite.
Hey, you know
but
what? It's all right, Lincoln. You get a lot of focus. This other guy that
he
we're
does,
about to chat
and that's
about,
one of the things I like about.
he needs some time in the
Yes.
spotlight. So, all right, well,
Absolutely.
let's stop dancing around this. We're here to talk about the absolute ass-kicking, name-taking general of the Union Army, definitely from March of 1864 on. But we're talking about General Ulysses S. Grant. So, Melissa, take it away. Let's talk about Ulysses Grant.
Okay, so I'm actually talking about John Rawlins.
Oh, even
But
better!
you can't talk about John Rawlins if you don't talk about Ulysses Grant.
My
Exactly.
bad. I got so wrapped up in the fact that we're going to talk about this relationship, I wanted to focus on the Grant because it's the one everybody
they
knows.
are synonymous.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. and-
Yes.
yes. I understand the Overland campaign, by the way, as good as I do because of studying Rawlins. So,
That makes
Yes.
sense.
Absolutely.
Rewind.
Yes.
Melissa, let's talk about Major Rawlins. Go.
Okay. Yes. So.
Dude, I'm such an amateur. All right.
So yeah, I really love talking about John Rawlins, and that is, and again, one of the reasons I really do is I do think he is an unknown. I think that's one of the most interesting things about him. There's several things I think about that too. Is one of the reasons I think he's fascinating is it's also a larger theme about who writes history. How do
Right.
we learn about history? In the time period of the Civil War, John Rawlins was very well known, very well liked, and he was, he was well known in Washington. He was, a famous person. In fact, in Galena, Illinois, before the war started, he was much more well known than Ulysses Grant. So. Nowadays he's sort of an obscure figure. Not many people know who he is, and I think that's really kind of fascinating. And I absolutely do think I kind of have this reputation of when we were in an office walking around saying no Rawlins, no Grant,
Oh, I'm with that.
because Rawlins is a huge factor in Grant's life, on his staff, and really in his life.
So not just during the War of the Rebellion years, but like preceding that.
Correct. Rawlins lives in Galena, Illinois, and in 1860, when Grant moves to Galena, Illinois, Grant is really on the downward spiral. He's moving to Galena, Illinois to take a job with his dad's leather shop. He's out of options at this point.
Right.
He's broke. Every venture that he has tried on his own, he has failed at. Not from lack of trying. He tries very hard. He works very hard, but he just has some bad luck. And the other thing that you need to know about Grant is he's so trusting. He has this very naive, trusting nature. Mm-hmm. And because of that, he can be very easily swindled. And he is. So he...
You mean like, trust me, I'll pay you back?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Wink.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. And he will literally, that will haunt him until his dying days. This sort of trusting nature that he has. And so by the time he gets to Galena, he's taking a position from his father at his father's leather shop, which he absolutely does not want to do, but he has to. He's got children, he's got a wife to support. And he has entered into some bad partnerships with people that have gone awry, has not, a real estate venture. He's done some farming ventures.
Right.
And they've all, not gone well. So he is broke. He has no money, and he has to go to Galena in an effort to sort of rebuild his life. So he ends up in Galena in 1860, and John Rawlins is a lawyer in Galena at the time. He was only about a block and a half away from the leather goods shop, and he does some work for the leather goods shop, and that's how they sort of know each other. And Rawlins is a very self-made man. He's a super hard worker. He's the second son in a family that grew up around that area. His father was sort of reckless. Some people, his father's history is a little bit disputed as to whether his father was a heavy drinker or not. Regardless, he was sort of reckless in his choices as well. And when Rawlins is about 17 years old, his father takes the oldest son to California to find gold. and spends a couple years out there, comes back with nothing. But that leaves John Rawlins back at home as the man of the house. He's got several other younger siblings, and he has to pay for his own education. He pays for his sister's education, and takes care of his mother, and becomes a lawyer. He educates himself and becomes a self-made man.
Sounds like the school of hard knocks.
Yes,
I'm
absolutely.
basically leaving you to run things, whether you're ready or not. So your choices are grow up or fail.
Absolutely, and he
Is it-
chooses to grow up.
Right. Is it Rawlins' relationship or lack thereof with his father that leads him to have a real issue with alcohol? And
I think that is part of it. He is obviously a very strong temperance man. He does not. He swears off drinking himself. And that's where the sort of the history, you can't obviously go back and find out whether or not his father was an alcoholic or not. There are stories that he possibly did drink too much. So Rawlins really does swear off drinking for himself, and I do think it's possible that he did have a drinking problem. His father did, and that's part of why he has such a strong, sort of
Just
penchant.
reaction, I guess.
Right,
Aversion to it,
exactly.
yeah.
Aversion to it, and yeah, and if he does, it's possible that that's one of the reasons why he understands it, the condition of it as well. So, when Grant shows up in Galena in 1861, they sort of become friends, and they work a little bit together. Grant hates working at the leather store. He really only does the physical work. He's really kind of actually considers the work beneath him. When, there's lots of stories about when people would come in, he wouldn't even go stand behind the register. He'd say, I'll go get the person who's supposed to be behind the register for you, because that wasn't him. He wasn't that, that was not his life calling. And it was his brothers who worked at the shop. So
all of this is after Grant's time out west and a lot of
Correct.
where his reputation as a drinker, and is that all happened before he arrives in Galena at this point?
Absolutely. And so in 1854 is when Grant does resign from the Army.
Right.
And it is because of a drinking problem.
Right.
It is because of a drinking issue. He shows up at the pay table inebriated, or at least hungover from being inebriated. And he's had a couple of brushes with drinking issues. He's at Fort Humboldt at that time in California. And he has a couple of brushes with personalities as well. A lot of Grant's drinking largesse of his story of drinking is also probably a little grander than it actually was, because people use it as a political.
Well, I was going to say, Henry Halleck, we're talking about you.
Absolutely. Oh yes. yes.
But no, I always like that, because one, I always like to place that in context for when he's showing up in Galena and like why. And this is after a lot of the things that we're going to talk about when we talk about Grant's reputation as a drinker. That's all happened before too.
Absolutely.
It gives us an opportunity to maybe address this just for the small moment, since he is not the absolute focus of this episode. Is yes, everything you said is true, right? He does have to resign. He does have this, but let's just he's not a lifetime drinker, and I think that's where we start to conflate, legend with the fact a bit.
Yeah, and I'll say, I mean, that's one of the things I think about. There is so much nobody can really agree,
Right.
on if you read any biography on Grant, they'll all be different. Was he an alcoholic? Was he not? Was
there's
he a
only
heavy
one
drinker?
acceptable biography at this point. It was written by Chernow.
Yeah,
we all know
it's
that.
my favorite, but yes.
Oh, there's a lot of good biographies.
kidding. I was kidding.
There are many, yes.
I just play favorites, Matt. We're just trying to get him on the show. You just got to tell him he's our favorite, so
that's
Ron
a
will
good
come
idea.
on.
Good point. Good point.
So nobody can agree, and again, you can't go back. There's
Right.
no blood test to take. But I think some of the people who refuse to allow Grant to be an alcoholic sort of have their own precognition or prejudgment about what an alcoholic is.
Sure.
I honestly think if you look at the stories and understand Grant's issue with drinking, and in 1849, he already is going to a church and asking for help with his drinking issue.
Right.
He then signs on with the temperance movement in an effort to curb his own drinking. And then in 1854, when he has to resign, he's afraid to come home to Julia because I'm sure they have some sort of understanding that he's not going to be drinking.
Right.
I don't have that prejudgment of he can't be an alcoholic, he's Grant. I actually think it's his biggest victory ever. That he
I like that.
overcomes his drinking issue to be Ulysses S. Grant.
Yeah, the one that we know, right? The Grant, yes.
Absolutely, yeah.
All of that is before the Grant we know. So
Right. That's an excellent point.
I dig that take, Melissa.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of what makes Rawlins so important. I think Grant does struggle with the drinking issue in the way that alcoholics do. And then that time period, drinking is a different thing.
Very much
Drinking
so.
is used medicinally.
Right.
And the idea for an alcoholic is you take a drink, you can't stop. It sort of turns a switch on. And it's a disease. And Grant cannot always get away from those issues. So if you look at some of the time periods in which he does or is reportedly has a drinking slip or a bender or whatever you want to call it, a binge drink or whatever episode during the war, those are almost always, and I believe might actually be the correct word instead of almost always, preceded by some sort of medicinal prescription for alcohol.
Oh, so
he's-
today's modern equivalent would be like if you have
An opiate.
Correct.
problem and you have surgeries, you can't or should not take your prescribed
Absolutely.
medications.
Yes,
So
yes.
there's your modern equivalent.
Yes, absolutely. So, he does have issues with it. But they are always preceded, as far as I can tell, by some issue such as that during the war period. And Rawlins plays a huge role in that. I mean, Rawlins. So in 1861, when the war kind of breaks out, Rawlins, when he goes to work with Grant on his staff, Rawlins is really well known. So I'll kind of back up and talk a little bit about how they get to the war together. Rawlins gives a speech in Galena, Illinois.
I was hoping you were going to talk about this.
Yeah, on April 15th of 1861. And it's this huge, rousing, speech about it's, country or no country,
There are no parties anymore.
Right, there are no parties anymore, it's country or no country. And, this really spurs, and this again is because he's a very well-known political figure and speaker in Galena.
Democrat too, isn't he?
He is a Democrat, yeah. And they ask him to speak, and this is right after Lincoln's call for volunteers, and he gives this rousing speech, and this is what spurs Grant to re-enlist in the Army. This is why he decides to go back to the Army. He's walking back to his home after this speech with his brother and says, I guess I should get back in the Army. And he runs the idea by Rawlins, and Rawlins says, absolutely, we need you. And so Grant kind of waits around, he helps train a bunch of the soldiers, goes off to the war. He's great. I mean, Grant is great. So his star just continues to rise up.
Because he's already got the resume in the military, right?
Absolutely.
He's war hero
Yes.
in Mexico, West Point graduate, and all that. So even though he's had the personal problems, when you take off that and you just put on the horse blinders of military
Right.
service, he's a stud.
Absolutely. These people who are joining the Army at this point they have no idea what it's like to be a soldier.
Right.
None.
He's
And
got a great
he
idea.
Does.
Yep.
Absolutely. They don't know. A lot of the, officers, their political appointees, they don't know how to raise a regiment. They don't know how to train troops. They don't even know what's entailed with that. Grant has quartermaster experience. He's got, experience training troops. He's got combat experience. He's got everything that's needed.
And he's a rider. Like he's a very well-known
Big time.
horse rider. So he can also train
Absolutely.
these people that are mounted to move with the army. So that's like a skill we don't really talk about. There's a difference between riding when no one's shooting at you and riding with your command while people are shooting at you.
Yes.
And Grant's got the latter experience.
Yeah, he's got all of that. Yes. So he's really, really important at this point in raising these troops that come from Illinois.
Now, he was looking for a bit of a substantial command there, too, at the beginning, wasn't he? Okay.
And he was not originally given it.
Right.
I mean, originally he helps raise the Joe Davies Guard, and he does not actually go off with them. Initially, he's waiting for them to give him colonelcy.
Right.
And originally they do not. And he's kind of dejected. He raises a whole regiment, goes, I believe goes down to Cairo with them, and then,
sounds right.
still doesn't get the colonelcy. And he was about to come back, and they come back to him and say, no, we want you to go with the 21st Illinois. So he does go with the 21st Illinois as a colonel and heads off to the war with them. So when he becomes a brigadier general, which is just months later, he's Grant,
Look, you're Grant. We can't have you be a colonel for very long. You don't know how important you're about to be, but you got to be a general
exactly.
now, right now.
Exactly.
That's that big swath of promotions in August of 61, isn't it?
Oh, like
Yes,
when everybody's getting
exactly.
shoved up the ladder.
Absolutely. It's a huge
Warp
number.
speed
Yes.
promotions. Go.
Yes. So when he becomes a brigadier general, then now he needs a staff, and Grant is also well known for being loyal to people who are loyal to him. He likes the people that he knows and trusts, so he does build his staff with people that he knows. And he writes to Rawlins and says, I need you to come. He asks Rawlins to come as his assistant adjutant general, and he makes him a captain. And Rawlins has no military experience.
I was getting ready to ask that. Does he have prior experience?
Nope, zero.
All right, I should have asked this question at the beginning just because I do this all the time, both in text and in speaking. Rawlins?
Oh, it is Rawlins.
No G.
Rawlins.
People do
Correct.
this all the time. I do this. I've heard Matt do this. I've heard a billion people do this. So I figured let's just put it out there.
No, that's good because actually, I brought some photos to show, of course, not that you can put them on the air, but
we like we did with Dana. We got the scans. We can find a way to share your photos.
well,
if you
you'll
want.
see that his name is misspelled everywhere.
Oh,
Yeah.
really? That's interesting.
I always tell this little side story about there was one point where I buy photos of him, CDVs and cabinet cards. And there was a bookshop that was, we have a autographed photograph of John Rawlins, I'll sell it to you. I was like, oh, great, I can't wait, send me the photos. And they sent me the photos, and of course, I'm reading it, and his name is misspelled, and then underneath it says late Secretary of War, and so
like in the autograph is
yes,
misspelled.
the autograph is misspelled. So I replied, and I said, well, I am interested in purchasing this because it was a later portrait of him as the Secretary of War, which I didn't have. I only had wartime photos of him, and I said, however, I'm not particularly willing to pay this price because it's not autographed. That's not his correct spelling of his name. Also, it says late Secretary of War, so I'm pretty sure he didn't sign it after
he died. He's like, he's like signing it. He's like, this will be worth more in a little bit. Hold on to that.
Right. So,
Oh, man.
so his name is
Keep this in your
misspelled all
pocket.
over the place.
So were they offended
yes.
that you pointed out that that it
No,
wasn't
they were
real?
very, very kind about it,
Oh,
and
that's
a
good.
little embarrassed. But I was like, whatever. But as long as you bring the price down, I still want to purchase it. So
Well, because some people try to pass off modern tintypes as originals, and people
Oh,
are,
yeah.
and they're like, it's totally legit. We're like, well, that guy has a Yankees hat on.
yeah,
I'm just kidding. They're never that bad.
That's how bad some of them are, though.
I
It's
know.
true.
All right.
Yes.
Well, I just wanted to clear up the Rawlins,
Yeah.
because it's something that we all do, myself included, and we should have touched that right away. But we're talking about Rawlins,
Yes.
no G.
Correct. Absolutely.
We're the only G's here, Matt. We're the OGs.
Jeez. Yeah, I said it.
Yes.
Moving on.
So Rawlins
Yep,
goes off to war
yep.
with Grant.
Nice.
Now, at this point in Rawlins' life, too, he's going through tragedy. His wife is literally the day, August 30th, 1861, he gets the appointment from Grant. his wife dies of tuberculosis.
No.
And yes, leaves him with 3 children. He's got 3 children at this point. So he has to bring the 3 children to New York to his wife's sister to live with them, and goes off to the war.
Unfortunately, that's like the worst familiar ground for that guy. He's like, crap, it's just like me and the kids. Again.
Yes.
That sucks.
Yeah, it was very tragic. And of course, tuberculosis will come back into his life because he does eventually die of tuberculosis at a young age. He's 31 when he goes off to the war with Grant as his assistant adjutant general, but essentially his chief of staff. So,
All right.
so when he's with Grant is also not good at paperwork. He's well known for like crumpling up his orders and putting them in his pockets and stuff like that. So Rawlins is really important in that respect. A lot of people talk about him being Grant's sort of conscience, his right-hand man, and Grant himself calls him his most indispensable officer. Charles Dana later will write some books, and he'll talk about Rawlins, and he says Rawlins bosses that headquarters around. He's really an essential piece of Grant's staff, and he will only become more so as the war goes on. He just continues to.
Touching on that, it popped in my head as you said it, bosses that headquarters around. It's a historical fiction piece of work, but if you read Jeffrey Shaw's Last Full Measure, they do feature Rawlins basically telling everybody in the book what to do. Like there's a scene,
Really?
I think there's one point.
Know that.
Yeah, if you read it at one point, there's a scene where Meade comes to meet Grant for the first time as, chief of the army and AOP commander, and there's like that meeting. But I think Rawlins intercepts him in the book, obviously, and basically tells him how that chat's going to go.
Yeah.
And you're like,
that's very
I don't think that's how
accurate.
that works rank wise, but I'm 90% sure that moment is a work of historical fiction. But what I think is successful there is focusing on his personality type,
Right.
and I think that's where I first learned that he wears the pants in the headquarters there. Maybe not on paper and by order, but when Grant's not around, it's his show to run things.
Absolutely, yes.
So,
And it
very
is. And he's also, because he's got this sort of close kinship with Grant. So when he goes to the war with Grant, he does actually extract a pledge from Grant that Grant will not drink during the war. He says,
Before they leave Illinois.
before Rawlins leaves Galena.
Okay,
Correct.
okay.
Grant is already out.
Right,
west,
right.
yeah.
That's right.
He extracts a pledge and says, "I will come and do this, but you will not drink. You must promise not to drink." He also extracts similar pledges from other people on the staff, but the first one he extracts is from Grant, and this will come up because there will be incidents during the war where Grant does falter.
Right.
Again, the most famous one really is this sort of Vicksburg incident in June. And it's the same thing. He's prescribed some medicine or whatever, but and then has
Is it this siege is taking too long? I'm suffering from boredom, and he's like, "Here, have a drink, General McGrant or McGrant."
McGrant,
It's a little
Nice.
Freudian slip there, General McGuire.
General McGuire.
That's how I would
Kind
deal with
of,
my boredom at
yes.
Vicksburg.
Before we get too far into their story together, how is Rawlins received by the rest of Grant's staff? Obviously, he's got a powerful personality and kind of rules the staff when Grant's not there. But how are others writing about him post-war?
Everybody loves Rawlins.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Rawlins is very, very well liked, very well respected. There are some of the other staff members that go to Galena that with him that don't stay. They're either sort of irresponsible. I mean, James Wilson, who later on becomes one of Grant's staff members, and Charles Dana also, who becomes a staff member later on. We'll talk about some of the people who came in 1861 with him, and they're sort of irresponsible and they don't stick around. Rawlins sticks around. I mean, Rawlins sticks around till the day he dies, which is post-war. So he will be tied to Grant for the rest of his life. And Grant will be tied to him for the rest of his life post-Rawlins. So, they are very close, but Rawlins is so well liked by everybody. In fact, there's one staff member he's not really a staff member, he's more like a reporter who comes but kind of becomes a staff member. Everybody who kind of comes into Grant's camp loves Grant. Charles Dana is sent there basically to spy on Grant.
Right.
And becomes a close confidant and likes him, McPherson was the same. He comes.
Why are we going to rat on this dude? This dude rocks.
That's basically what it's like, yes.
Yo, I'm going to lie in this report. This general is actually doing a really good job.
I actually think
he probably
that's
was.
pretty accurate when you talk about Charles Dana. I do think he was sent there in some respects to see if there was any truth to some of the drinking rumors. Or any of the rumors about Grant in general, because there are lots of political generals at play.
Oh yeah, especially early in the war.
Right, before Grant becomes lieutenant general, before 1864 even, there's lots of people at play here that they dislike that Grant is rising so fast. They think they should be rising, and
McClernand.
And yes, McClernand for sure. And so they will, and McClernand is dead on, spot on, uses the drinking issue,
Yeah.
And
it's a weapon for him.
Absolutely, and it's an effective one. That is why Charles Dana ends up in that camp, because of those types of rumors. But again, he
gets
comes
there and
in
he's like, "This is actually not that
that's
bad."
partially Rawlins. Rawlins is like, when this guy gets here, we're going to treat him well. He's always going to. He tells the staff he's always going to have a tent propped up next to Grant. He's part of us now. He was sat at the table with them all the time. It was like, we're not going to be secretive with him. We're going to be completely transparent and tell him what we're trying to do here. And once you understood that, you couldn't help but like Grant. And you couldn't help but like Rawlins too, because Rawlins was dedicated to Grant and this Union cause. He was very, very, very dedicated to it. And very true and loyal to Grant. He was also fun and funny. Like, one of the things about him is he's super excitable. He gets really irate about stuff, and he swears all the time.
Is this
Grant,
why I like him so much?
Oh yeah, he's great.
I was like, are you talking about me or are
Yeah.
you talking about Grant? Okay, you're talking about yes.
So Grant doesn't like to swear.
I'm
Right.
sorry, I
This
didn't
is
mean Grant.
Rawlins.
I meant
Rawlins.
Rawlins. I
No.
meant Rawlins.
Yeah.
Dude, I'm going to do that all night. For everybody listening that already hates the silliness that I bring to this show, you're about to get wrecked because I'm not going to keep these men straight the entire night.
Well, again, they're synonymous. Their
Two peas
stories
in a pod.
Just
really,
like Matt and I. By the way, am I Grant or are you Rawlins? Like, we're stuck together,
I
obviously.
think it's pretty obvious you have the physique and beard of Grant, where I do not.
But I have the language of Rawlins. All right. Well, moving past my potty mouth and back onto Rollins' potty
Right,
mouth.
so he's sort of this excitable, an like animated figure in camp too, and they have a very fond friendship also, Grant and Rawlins. So I think anybody who kind of is encircled with them can see that. I mean, I brought some quotes I can read a little bit
Yeah.
about, some of the things that people say about, Rawlins and Grant together. One of the journalists that's with him says, General Grant was a man who made friends very slowly. While he had a great many acquaintances, I think he had a very limited circle of friends. And I mean men whom he trusted and whose advice he accepted. And that's very true. He didn't, the people he kept close were people he kept close for years. And again, this will be a problem for him when he becomes president. He just spends a lot of time trying to protect Orville Babcock, and that backfires on him. People will take advantage of this very trusting, loyal nature of his. Chernow writes about him that Rawlins could penetrate the zone of privacy that Grant drew subtly about himself. Rawlins could confront him with uncomfortable truths and fiercely contest his judgment, spouting opinions in a stentorian voice. With his thoroughgoing skepticism and mistrust of people, he was the ideal foil to Grant's excessively trusting nature. Another lieutenant in camp said, Rawlins was always getting excited about something that had been done to Grant. he would prance around and say, "General, I would not stand such things." To which Grant would say, "Oh, Rawlins, what's the use in getting excited over a little thing like that? It doesn't hurt me, and it makes the other fellow feel a little good." But
Rawlins is his hype man.
he
That's
is.
right,
And,
exactly.
and again, there are lots of people that come into camp trying to take advantage of him. And Grant trusts everybody. Rawlins trusts nobody. You know, you're coming near my general, you're going to go through me first.
All right.
And that's what he does for him. And McClernand is a perfect example. You know, there's a whole story about, you know, in Vicksburg when he sort of, you know, talks about the forts and how he's sort of, you know, gone into the defensives and then, you know, the attack.
Oh, the second assault.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
May 22nd?
Yeah,
I
it is
believe?
May 22nd. And actually,
63.
this
Yeah,
is.
it's 22. Yeah.
Yeah, there was this thing I read. It said one of the people in the room, I can't remember who, one of the journalists, he remembers, "I shall never forget the fearful burst of indignation from Rawlins." This is on after the May 22nd attack. You know, where McClernand had reported that he'd captured 2 of the rebel forts.
Right.
And with more men, he could break through. But then that was it was exaggerated.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it was not true. And it hampers Grant's plans and costs lives.
A
which
lot of lives.
Grant is very, very upset about. You know, there's no reason for death when it doesn't have to happen. He says, you know, "I'll never forget the fearful burst of indignation from Rawlins and the grim, glowering look of disappointment and disgust which settled on Grant's usually placid countenance when he was convinced of McClernand's duplicity and realized the cost in dead and wounded." So, you know, Rawlins was just like, you know, the way they describe it is he's prancing around. He just wants after
I feel like
McClernand.
he's having the outward reaction you would
Yes.
expect Grant to have.
Absolutely. And I think that's why they're so connected. And I think they both respect each other for the extremes of their personalities that they both don't possess, but agree upon.
I have this really stupid visual in my head, but if for our younger audience, those of you who are familiar with the television show Key and Peele,
Oh, I was thinking the same thing.
we
actually.
have Jordan Peele do, you know, his President Obama impression, and then Keegle Mike and Key does his Luther, the emotional translator.
Right.
So whereas President Obama usually speaks with poise and grace, Luther would be like his street dude behind him,
Yes.
like saying what he really meant.
Yes.
Right.
And I feel like this is the dynamic is Grant is like, well,
Yes.
you know, looking tomorrow, and Rawlins is like, fuck him up real bad.
Exactly.
You know, like it's like, whoa, okay, dude, chill.
Yes.
The outward
absolutely.
reactions, yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's a good.
yes.
That's a good, healthy way to understand this. Is if that's part of the dynamic, you know,
Yes.
because sometimes, you know, people exist in yin and yang relationships. I mean, Matt and I started much more yin and yang than we are now. I think I've worn off on the old guy at this point by 4 seasons of doing the show. But I mean, that stuff usually tends to have dynamics that become successful.
Yeah,
so
I
that's a
absolutely
good
think
foreshadow.
I think that's very true. I do think that Grant needed
Yeah.
somebody like that in
would
his
agree.
camp,
Yeah.
and Rawlins admires Grant so much. He respects him. He loves him. You know, I mean, he's like a father figure, you know, brother to him. He, of course, is indebted to him for making him a captain at first. And, of course, Rawlins rises his, you know, rank continues to rise through the war with Grant. And it's because of Grant. Grant respects him, and he respects Grant in return. And, you know, so it's all these different pieces of this protection, and it's so as many of these people who knew you could maybe get to Grant and manipulate a situation with his naivete, you had to get through Rawlins first, and people knew that.
It's like running the gauntlet. They're like,
Yes.
it's not worth it. That guy's gonna crush us.
Yes, absolutely. You could not get through Rawlins, and people understood that. And when some of these rumors about his drinking and issues like that would arise, of course, they both have a champion back in Galena with Elihu Washburn,
Right.
who's a very close friend of Abraham Lincoln. And Washburn knows that Rawlins is there. So it's, hey, is this actually, you know, happening? And Rawlins will vehemently deny. He will write back about his sobriety. You know, there's an understanding that even if you maybe think some of this stuff, these rumors about Grant are possible, the fact that Rawlins is there disputes it, because people understand that stuff's not actually going to happen under Rawlins' watch either.
Is he as close to above reproach as we can get? Like, if Rollins says it, it's gospel. I mean, like, he's a man of his word. Like, he has integrity. Like, we can just take him at his word like that.
Absolutely.
It's like,
I mean, Rawlins is, he's fallible and to some degree as well.
as
Some of
we all
the
are.
humans
Yeah.
are, but I'm just in the way
Right.
that, like, everybody's got somebody in their circle that's like, when that dude or
Yeah,
that miss
absolutely.
says something, it's like, you take it because
Yes,
they don't
yes.
mess around. Like, I'm wondering
Absolutely.
if that's who
Absolutely.
he is. Okay.
Rollins did not mess around. He was not concerned about reputation of himself. I mean, he was very selfless in his actions here too, in that what he did was for Grant and for the Union, and this was everything here right now is about winning this war for the Union and protecting Grant from outside influences and helping Grant protect
and from himself,
From
yeah. From
himself.
himself, yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think that's an incredibly important point to bring up, Melissa, because oftentimes I think there's been such mythology put around Grant, and more specifically his potential drinking problems, is that we think, oh, it's just rumor.
Yeah.
Okay. Or this is something that he made his way through, he fought his way through, and he absolutely did, but we don't think about the actual ramifications.
Right.
His career was on the line several times.
Several times,
And
yes.
it's guys, very powerful
Even
individuals.
after Fort Donelson
Exactly.
and Henry, Halleck demotes him.
Right.
Yes.
And we have some very powerful politicians and military men
Absolutely.
looking at him with an extremely critical eye.
Yes.
Washburn, of course, is backing him, but he is sweating it
Yes.
because he's hearing these rumors and
Yes.
these full-blown newspaper reports. There's newspapers that are
Yes.
going after Grant. And even Lincoln is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
Lincoln's bumped him up to Major General by this point, but now he's getting all these reports, and of course, after it gets worse for a time there after Shiloh.
Right.
And so there's a lot of concern.
There's a lot of rumors after Shiloh
Right.
about his drinking, and it is they're not true.
Right.
He does not necessarily, as far as the record shows, have an episode of these sort of drinking binges that he will go on
Right.
after Shiloh, but his star is rising and people are coming after
Blood's
him
in the
now.
water.
Well, I was getting
Yeah.
ready to ask, in relation to all this and President Lincoln, isn't there a moment where Lincoln's basically like, let him drink, he's winning?
Yes, after
Yep.
Vicksburg and when he's promoted and people start, these rumors.
All you
he's-
ninnies, he's
right.
putting W's in the win column
He's
for
literally,
us.
yeah, says something to the effect of, well, you tell if General Grant is drinking, you tell me what whiskey he's drinking because I'll buy him a
We'll
case.
get it to him. Yeah,
Send it
that's
to
right.
the rest of them.
Exactly,
yeah.
absolutely, because he's doing what nobody else is doing.
Right.
He's pushing forward, and a forward movement always when other generals, Halleck especially, want to hold back, be safe,
Right.
wait and see what's happening. Grant is not like that. He's like, no, we have an opportunity now. Let's go. He was always well known for saying, after, the victory and defeat, the next person who goes is the winner, So like the second day of Shiloh is the perfect example. First person who acts is the one who's winning, and
Right.
he's going to be the first person acting.
All right, observation coupled with a question that maybe ties us all together. So understanding that his career is on the line, many times throughout the war, you kind of have to pitch a perfect game, right? You are being given probably just enough rope to hang yourself with at any given moment. And
it's a good way of looking at
Yeah.
it.
so, one, my question is he aware of that he has to basically put up these stellar performances over and over again? Or is he just nose to the grindstone, what will be? And like, he just happens to keep, because I don't want, when I'm about to say, and he just keeps winning, he doesn't just undefeated. Like, it's like the whole war is one step forward, two steps back. There's a lot of failure and not winning, but
Right.
Grant does a lot of critical winning when the
Right.
Union isn't getting that.
Right.
So my question is he aware that his job is basically tenuous at any given moment, and these wins are what are keeping him in position?
I think he is very well aware of the shaky ground that he's on. I do think he is surprised at the attacks
Yes.
on his character and
Okay.
his military action, after he starts winning, he's a nice guy. Like he doesn't have that sort of malicious ladder climbing.
I'll step on you.
Meanwhile,
Exactly.
Rollins
So he
is like,
doesn't
why are you
reckon-
talking shit? He got
Yes.
Forts Henry and Donaldson. What have
Right.
you done? Grant's
Exactly,
like, calm down,
exactly.
calm down, John.
Yes. And they come after him after that, and he's like, "What's happening?
He's like, "This
I
dude
just won
won."
this stuff." Like,
Okay.
And again, he gets demoted. Halleck demotes him for a brief time.
And
I must have
Halleck-
said-
For red tape, it's like he hasn't been sending in his reports,
Right.
you know. He wants reports every day of troop movements because there are other generals, McClernand, you know, reporting that he's not, you know, he could be possibly drinking again, and, you know, he's messing up in certain respects. So Halleck, who's also looking not too great here.
Right.
And again, he will disappear because he's not. You know, he's you know, holds back. He wants to be safe.
He's going to try to play chess with McClellan, too.
Absolutely,
and those two guys are gonna...
absolutely. And yes, absolutely. When he has McClellan, he's got a partner who also wants to hold Grant down.
Right,
you know, Grant is rising. So, you know, again, he's got this real trusting nature. So he's surprised by the attacks on him. He's not in it for politics one bit.
Well,
he
and
just
Grant-
wants to win the war.
Right.
You know?
And Grant's got some real blinders on, to be perfectly honest, in
Yes.
the first couple of years of the war in regards to Halleck.
Yes.
Because he has a lot of respect for Halleck.
He does.
Halleck is old brains, after all.
Absolutely.
He is brilliant in his own way. But Grant...
Even after he demotes
Exactly.
him, he
Yep.
still writes this letter saying they called Halleck in and he thought he was going to be named Secretary of War. And Grant says there's nobody better for the job.
Right.
This is after Halleck has demoted
Do
him.
we have any record of Rollins' reaction to this demotion?
No, I wish there was.
Is it like the screaming I've been doing on this episode? Do you think he just
I'm sure
lights
it
his
was
own
not
tent on
pretty.
fire? He's so upset.
I would not be surprised.
Yeah, they're like, what are you
at
doing? He's
all.
like, I don't know what to do. He just burned down my own tent. This sucks.
Him and Sherman.
We should be halfway to Washington by now.
Absolutely.
Sherman.
I would not be surprised if that was.
All right, well, if
his
you have a
reply.
reaction out there in the listening world, if you know
Yeah.
how Rollins reacts, let us know because we want to know if he flips shit or not. So
Yeah,
anyway,
he probably does.
I imagine he did.
I am imagine that he was quite upset. So
Grant's like,
yes.
it's cool, baby. So.
Yes, but I mean, again,
Well, and he's
Grant,
not entirely cool with it because he goes into a depression there.
No,
for a
no,
while.
for sure.
Yeah, he writes back and says, He actually asks, to be removed
Exactly.
I
from
was going to say
command.
he's basically trying to get out, not trying to get out of the army, but he's looking for if this isn't working, I should
Yeah,
go.
he's
Right?
like, if you've stripped me of my command, then let me go.
Right.
And he's gonna go out west. I was like, if you want to send me out west somewhere, fine, I'll go out there.
I've already been in California. I've seen it.
Yeah,
I can
pretty
do it
much.
again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it really is the whole sort of Vicksburg that brings him back. You know, I mean, there's a lot of who's going to do this Vicksburg thing, and he gets sort of.
And there's John McClernand.
And yeah, exactly.
doing
McClernand
the
saying
Vicksburg
me, I
thing.
will, and Washburn is sort of like, why don't you try Grant?
Yeah.
So he gets back in Vicksburg, and he wins.
Is that the gunboat incident where is it
Which
Grant?
one?
But the famous one where Grant like runs the boats right in front of all the guns.
Yes,
like,
that is Vicksburg. Yes, and honestly, some of that is Rawlins. I mean, the Rawlins and I
Porter?
believe Wilson actually. We're talking Wilson and Rawlins before the Vicksburg. He's got some ideas. Grant does for how Vicksburg is going to work. How are they going to do this? And Wilson and Rawlins are discussing it, and Wilson kind of comes up with this sort of idea. We should just move the troops on land and run the boats past them
at night quietly.
Exactly.
Yeah, just run them.
Yeah, and there is a meeting of some of the generals at that time, and Rawlins does sort of bring it up. Wilson has been taken somewhere else at that point, so he has to bring it up by himself. And he does, and Grant actually says, that was one of the things that he was considering. He had 3 ideas, and that was one of them, and he does, to his credit, try his first 2 ideas first, and they're not working. Right. and then he does the gunboats. He runs the gunboats. That's kind of brings me to this sort of idea of his memoirs, which is this sort of interesting controversy of Rawlins and Grant after the fact. That Rawlins is barely mentioned. You can see just in the stuff I've talked about so far.
Yeah.
We're only up to 1863.
Yeah, and
You know,
he's like
and
everywhere in
huge.
this man's life.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely. I haven't even talked about the drinking episode. You know, when he has this drinking episode in Vicksburg, in June 5, June 6, or whatever, and Rawlins does have to write him a note. He writes him a note. It's very.
It's a sketch of a middle finger. It says, "You
Yeah.
promised."
It's like pretty much. He says, "The great solicitude I feel for the safety of this army leads me to mention what I had hoped never again to do.
no.
The subject of your drinking. I have heard that, and this again is where I believe this story is true. You know, it has been obviously exaggerated up the wazoo, or I should say up the yazoo, because that's where it
Yazoo
was.
River.
but-
That's a good one.
I like that. I like that.
It begins with a medicinal prescription for him for alcohol. The other thing about Grant, which is I also kind of think lends to the fact that he is an alcoholic, is that most of the reports of his drinking aren't even that he drinks so much, but when he does drink,
He's just sloppy.
it affects him so greatly. He does not have to drink that much to become sloppy
Inebriated.
I'm glad you
drunk.
said that. That was one of the other things. Was by reputation, I think he's also a lightweight. Not only is he a sloppy
Absolutely,
drunk, but I
yes.
think he's a lightweight. My co-host is like,
yeah.
"Me, I'm 2 beers,
Yeah,
I'm done."
I'm a lightweight.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. It hits him very hard, and it doesn't take long for him to be slurring his words and be falling down drunk after just a very small amount of liquor. It just affects him in a different way.
Sherman was like, "Did you say slick him tomorrow?"
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Mhm. So he writes this letter, you know, he says, I've heard, you know, that Dr. McMillan induced you, notwithstanding your pledge to me, to take a glass of wine. And today, when I found a box of wine in front of your tent and proposed to move it, which I did, I was told that you had forbid it being taken away, for you intended to keep it until you entered Vicksburg, that you might have it for your friends. And tonight, when you should, because of the condition of your health, if nothing else, again, he is sick, be in bed, I find you where the wine bottle has just been emptied, in company with those who drink, and urge you to do likewise. And the lack of your usual promptness of decision and clearness in expressing yourself in writing tended to confirm my suspicions." This is what I really like about this letter. It's a
I feel like I just got lectured.
respectful letter, though.
But I feel like I just got lectured.
Yeah, he says, you have the full control of your appetite and to let drinking alone. Had you not pledged to me the sincerity of your honor early last March that you would drink no more during the war and kept that pledge during your recent campaign, you would not today have stood first in the world's history as a successful military leader. The thing I love about it is he's saying, you're great. You're
Yeah,
Grant.
right.
Don't do this.
He's like guilt tripping him into his own greatness.
Absolutely. He's saying,
good way
you
to
have
describe it.
control of this. Make sure you keep control of it because you are a great military leader and we need you right now.
What is John Rollins' actual profession? He's a lawyer?
Lawyer.
Correct.
So lawyer/life coach.
yeah,
There you
pretty
go.
much.
At this point now.
That's honestly, if there was such a thing as a life coach back then, it would actually be more accurate
Grant.
because
Good description.
because he does this. He fends off, the people with the malintent who are sort of trying to take things from Grant. He advises Grant. Another perfect example is General Orders Number 11, when Grant is furious about all the people.
I
the
blame his father
sutlers.
for that.
Absolutely, I do too. I absolutely think it's he issues that order knowing that his father and his little,
His
con
buddies
men,
that are running around with him,
basically are coming. He issues that order and to say, you cannot come into my camp. You cannot come into any camp. We're not going to do any deals with you. Forget it.
Right.
And Rawlins says, do not issue this order.
Right.
They will take it out. They will take it back, and Grant says, fine, let them. And I think his judgment is clouded because his father is taking advantage of him.
Yep.
And he has
That's a good
he has
way to
very
look at
little
it.
recourse against his father. I mean,
He's never able really to stand up to his father.
Yeah, 2 years earlier, he's literally crawling back to his father for a job because, of the situation of his life at that point.
I wonder if
So-
part of that mutual loyalty and respect to each other from Grant's perspective comes from the fact that, like, in a time where Grant was maybe at his lowest, Rawlins didn't judge him for it.
Absolutely. I do think
that's
that's true. I think that's very true. And I think that's one of the things when you think about the sobering effect of Rawlins. It's not that Rawlins walked around behind him saying, don't drink that, don't drink that, don't drink that. He feels better about himself. He feels like he's a military leader. He knows that Rawlins is looking at him as this great leader and general that the Union is calling on.
What is the Lincoln quote I'm thinking of? Rawlins appeals to the better angels of Grant's nature.
There
Yes,
you go.
absolutely. And Grant feels that and understands it. Every time there is an episode of Grant slipping or something, it's usually this medicinal thing, but Rawlins is never there, and Julia's not there
Who
either.
keeps,
Right.
What doc keeps prescribing him? Why? Do we
Well,
know?
they don't
like,
understand that at the time.
Okay.
They don't understand for an alcoholic to have one drink, one
like a
bit of
trigger
liquor,
drink. Yeah.
that triggers the craving aspect
okay.
of alcoholism, and that once you've had that, you're going to drink more. Your brain is asking for more. Your actions are not of your own anymore. That it's they don't understand that disease aspect of it. Again, I think that's one of the great things about Grant. He gets that very early on when he starts going to dinner parties. He's the first person to turn his glass over. He actually tells people, without understanding that it's a disease, if I have one drink, it's over. I can't stop drinking. He gets that about himself before, society even understands what alcoholism is. He understands it in himself, and he doesn't want to succumb to it.
Right.
He tries very hard not to. And again, it's these sort of incidents, usually when he's prescribed it for some sort of medicinal purpose. He takes it. The doctor's telling you to take it. He's very sick at this point. Lots of people in his camp are sick, and that's one of the things that brings Charles Dana out there. Again, there's a lot of discussion about, people in camp being sick. There's lots of, is the healthcare okay? What's happening out there, Grant,
Yeah, the Army's not moving. We're hearing rumors about the general.
Right.
And
Is
the
anything
boys
happening?
Are,
Are
sick.
you guys
What's
going to win
happening?
this? Yeah, right. Exactly. So,
Right.
what I was kind of saying was the interesting thing about it is this sort of controversy about Rawlins and Grant is that when Grant writes his memoirs, he only mentions Rawlins 4 times, and they're very scant. One of them does say, very fond things about Rawlins, that, he was. The first mention of him is just the discussion of the speech he gives in Galena. And then, he talks about him being on his staff and how he was very instrumental to his staff, and he, was very fond of him. It's a very nice passage, but when you think about all this stuff, how important he was in his life, he's sort of left out of it. And which is where I
Why?
think the interesting thing about is, who writes history? Because so that was sort of one of the things that really kind of drew my interest to this story of Rawlins and Grant was, I thought their story of their friendship and, this sort of camaraderie that they have through the war and, is very interesting. But then this sort of post-war story of theirs is super interesting too. And, Grant writes his memoirs in 1885. He finishes them, 3 days before he dies.
Right.
And by that point, Rawlins has been dead for quite a while. He dies in 1869. And so there's actually, after the memoirs come out, this huge sort of controversy from some of these staff officers about why isn't Rawlins in here? And
Our man isn't even 40 years old when he dies?
he's 39.
Wow.
38. He's 38 when he dies.
Wow.
38, and he was Secretary of War. He
Well,
was
I host a
Chief of
podcast when I'm
Staff.
36, so
Yeah.
let's stick that in your pipe and smoke
I know.
it.
I'm like, okay.
Big deal, Secretary of War.
Yeah,
loser.
I know, right?
I'm in the War Department. They don't even have a War Department
Yeah.
anymore.
I know.
I hope somebody laughed at that because my co-host is he's already punched me in the face right now.
Yes.
Four straight seasons of you quitting, right?
Yeah, exactly. The quiet quitting.
Quiet quitting.
Quiet quitting.
You can't quiet quit your own show.
No, I can't.
Oh,
Quietly
man.
quitting. Yes. So that's one of the other things that drew me to this story and draws me to the story. I think it's very interesting.
Is he still mourning him? Do you think that might be part of it?
I think so. The first person I asked about it was Brooks Simpson, who of course wrote the lots of biographies on
Yeah,
Grant.
absolutely.
He's a huge Grant scholar. I saw him at Civil War Institute.
Wrote the best books on Grant ever. Come on the show.
Yeah. He's great.
We were lying about Chernow earlier. It's
so,
you.
well, he doesn't like Chernow that much. So,
Oh, definitely come on the show. Let's talk about that.
I mean, I don't know. I shouldn't speak for him, but
Yeah. Well, we'll find out one day. We'll speak for himself. We'll get into that controversy another day.
right. But
There you
he's,
go.
I mean, he's written so much about Grant. I've talked with him a little bit about it, and I did ask him, why do you think he is left out of the memoirs? And we didn't have much time to talk about it, but he says, briefly, first of all, he's a staff officer, and you're talking about paperwork, bossing the headquarters around, running the show in a way that you're not going to write about in military actions. When you're talking about battle, Rawlins did not command troops.
That's true.
So he's not going to get into the stories about the battles and stuff like that. So in that aspect, he is going to be left out of it. It doesn't necessarily mean he's not important to those, but you have to choose your words wisely when you're writing a book too. So in that aspect, he's left out for that reason. And Grant never mentions his drinking once in his memoirs.
Right.
It is absolutely left out entirely. And, so if there is any respect in, that nature of their relationship is left out as well. So I always found that really fascinating. There's a huge uproar from some of Grant's other staff members who really liked Rawlins a lot after these memoirs come out because he is left out of the memoirs so much. So Sylvanus Cadwalder was a reporter who, tagged along with the Grant staff or whatever for the second half of the war. He writes this book about Grant, and it's scathing in a way. I mean, it's not scathing, but it's really over-exaggerates these sort of drinking issues. Cadwalder, he loved Rawlins. He names his son Rawlins. He lived with Rawlins and his wife in D.C. for a while after after the war, and Grant is working in D.C. and Rawlins remains his chief of staff in D.C. as well. So Cadwalder is upset that Rawlins is left out of the memoirs more. Wilson and Dana are also upset about it. Wilson especially has a lot of issues with Grant politically. Some of them really just selfish, that he wanted to have a little bit more, influence and be a little bit more of a political player himself, and Grant wasn't going to give him that. So there's some issues there. And again, this is where who writes history? They sort of concoct this whole plan or idea that Grant was jealous or upset that Rawlins was getting so much credit, so he leaves him out of his memoirs on purpose. It kind of sticks with some of these staff members. They're bitter about it until they're done. Wilson writes a couple of books. He writes a biography of Rawlins. He writes a biography of Dana, and one of Grant. And some of the stuff he says is clearly politically motivated in this respect, that he's upset about Rawlins being left out of the memoirs. He's upset with Grant's politics, and but those things are in print.
It does seem weird to me that he would leave him out. I mean, he considers him a friend, right? Like,
So,
we
yes.
never debate this. Like, Grant considers, I know Rawlins considers Grant, but like, this is a two-way street,
This is
right?
the best part. Yes. So
Okay.
so this is what the kind of controversy is. Like, did Grant leave him out? This post-war upset, with him, and this is why I say no. Absolutely, he did not. Grant loved Rawlins as much. When Rawlins dies in 1869, he leaves the executorship of his children to Grant. Grant takes care of Rawlins' children until the day he dies. He gets his son an appointment at West Point. He, pays for the daughter's clothes. I mean, everything. At one point, he's literally helping his widow pick out the cupboards in the house. After, when she moves, and she moves on and marries somebody else after Rawlins dies, Grant takes the children away and brings them back to Rawlins's family and gives them to the Smiths, which is the first wife's sisters, that
Right.
family. So he is taking care of these children until he dies, and Julia takes care of them, the
So then
executorship of it afterwards.
how do you leave him out? I mean, if he's your friend in public and in private, right? Because let's be honest, like a lot of their relationship is probably private because there are those temperance conversations.
Absolutely,
But
yes.
like,
Some of it is that, yes.
either way, how do you just leave him out? He's there for so many things. I mean, he's just there.
Yeah.
Like, how do you leave him out?
But I actually think that's part of it is
He's just there?
you know? I mean, he's filling out the paperwork, or he's policing what's happening in camp.
Right.
He's doing,
Matt, I'm going to make an oath to you right now. If I ever write a memoir, I will mention you in it a lot.
Maybe once or twice.
Yeah.
At least once or twice, but probably a lot more.
Right. Again, the times that he does mention Rawlins, they are, fondly, he remembers him, as indispensable, the part of his staff. But yes, I think that is part of it. It's also, I think, Rawlins dies in 1869. He's had an entire life, past that. He's had another term of presidency. He's had,
Right.
his round the world trip with Julia,
Right.
and he's also gone through a whole bunch of other stuff. Again, falling prey to some really shady deals where he loses all of his money, not just his, but his son's money too, and near the end of his
Fred?
life. Yes, and that's why he writes these memoirs. He was not intending to write them. Mark Twain literally convinces him to write them, saying, I will make you some of that money back. You need to write your memoirs. And he helps him write the memoirs.
It's a good thing he trusted him after being
Absolutely.
screwed that many times.
Yes, it's the only reason that Julia is not destitute
Right.
after Grant dies. Because clearly these memoirs make a lot of money. And that is the only reason that Julia has any money to her name after he's gone. Because he has lost everything.
Right.
Again, in a very trusting partnership deal that turned into a swindle, So, I mean, I do think there is some truth to the fact that he just not forgets, but
I just have a hard time with it just from the simple fact that he's your friend. Like, if you're writing a book, don't you think you'd mention, like, your boy in it?
yeah,
Like, I mean, just
no,
that,
I do.
That's like that's hard, but I also get that Grant in a lot of that memoir is writing about the job.
Right.
And from the perspective of the job, he's a staff officer.
Right,
And
exactly.
I hate speaking that way.
I do too, and I think that's one of the unfortunate things. To say that is to undervalue how important a staff officer is,
Right.
and
I think
and
also-
especially Rawlins.
And I also think
you
part
know.
of my sort of problem with this in this moment is just because we have 160 years of being able to have digested and broken apart and looked at this relationship. And we understand now in the 21st century how important
Right.
this relationship was both publicly and privately to the various campaigns and whatever. But it's just, man, when you come back to the simple fact that they were friends, like, dude, mention your
Yeah,
buddy.
no,
Like,
I
mention
do
your
agree.
buddy.
I think I do agree, and I think if he could have foreseen that sort of, conspiracy theory,
He would have written about
he
him.
would have
Oh, sure.
corrected it and made sure. Again, that the other thing I think about is, and the other example I give as to why I don't really believe that he, maliciously left. First of all, I don't think he's malicious, but maliciously would have left Rawlins out in any way is in late 1860s after Rawlins dies. Or the early 1870s, I think it's actually 69 even, he actually endeavors to have a monument to Rawlins built in Washington, D.C. He says, I want this monument, I want it to be built. And by 1872, I think it is, it's just stalled in
I was going to
Congress.
ask, does this monument exist?
It does exist.
It does.
I've visited it many times.
Is it in
yes.
Washington?
It is, and it is in Rawlins Park.
There you go.
Yes,
Oh,
and
good
that
place
is
to put it.
all because of Grant. I mean, it got stalled in Congress. It did not have funding. It was not happening, and Grant is well into his presidency at this time, and Rawlins has been gone for years. And he says, what is happening with this monument? I want this monument to be built. And he writes a letter to some of the congressmen saying, get this passed. Get it. He gets it passed. It gets done. So that is all Grant's doing. He gets that monument built. So there's some truth, I think, to the fact that, so much time had passed. Also, if you really consider Grant's state of mind at the end of his life.
Well, that's the point I was going to make, is he's out of time.
Yeah.
He needs to finish these
He
things.
he knows he's out.
He is under
He knows.
pressure.
He is
He's also being
very-
treated heavily with cocaine.
Oh, yeah.
Swabs of cocaine on his throat, and
I was
you know.
I was gonna make this joke earlier with the prescription of alcohol because people will have a hard time understanding that. But this leads me to one of my favorite memes in the internet era, is about how medicine in the 1800s was like, you've got ghosts in your blood. Why don't you do some cocaine?
yes,
Right.
Like-
pretty much.
like,
That's
cool.
exactly what it
What?
was, though. Yes.
So,
Our friends at the National Museum of Civil
They
War Medicine
love that meme.
are shaking their fists at
but
the
they
radio.
love that meme
Yeah,
behind
I
the
know.
scenes. They'll never share it publicly. But Kyle, you laugh. You
Yep.
laugh.
It's very true, though. Yes.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, so obviously, so he's obviously, he's medicated, we'll say,
Yeah.
and he's on a clock that he's hyper aware of.
He
so
is
that probably
very aware
also
of.
does,
Absolutely, yes,
affect the
yes.
writing.
And again, he understands too that he's been sold this idea that these memoirs are going to save Julia
save him,
from being
exactly.
destitute,
Yep.
and you don't have a lot of time.
I mean, it
left,
works.
Oh,
I mean,
it
it
absolutely
It
works.
absolutely works. Absolutely.
We're gonna find the
Yes.
original lost manuscript, and it's gonna say dedicated to my friend John.
Right.
Oh, that
yeah.
would be awesome.
That would be pretty awesome.
Then it ends the controversy right there. We're
Yes.
like, okay, he dedicated the whole book to him.
Yes, that would be great.
Somebody
I would-
find that
I
so we
would
can
love
prove
it. Yes.
That's what's in Grant's too.
Yeah,
So, question
exactly.
for both of you, but it's going to inevitably end up in a question for you, Maddie B.
Okay.
Does Rawlins go everywhere Grant goes during the war?
Not everywhere. He will go with him most everywhere, but there are periods of time where he either stays back with camp, goes
Right.
forward to camp to set stuff up. At one point, he goes to D.C. to actually act as the political, go-between, whatever, to report to Lincoln. He meets with Lincoln himself. There's actually a period in 1864 where Rawlins contracts tuberculosis from his wife. So by 1863, he's starting to get sick.
Yeah.
By 1864, he's very sick, and he needs to take a leave of absence. So he takes a leave of
I
absence
think
for
Grant demanded he take the
absolutely.
leave.
So that's what I
Yes.
was getting ready to ask you. In March of 1860, not March, what is it, March of 65? When does he come to, is it March of 64 when he comes to your site?
Oh, it's August of 64.
It's August. Why do I always want to say, it's March when he comes east.
Right.
It's August when he comes to fire the crap out of David Hunter. Is Rawlins with
Correct.
him?
He's not.
He's not. That's what I was
No,
getting
yeah,
ready to
there's
ask.
that period of time where he's taken a leave of absence because he's very sick, and but he comes back.
Was he at Appomattox?
He was at
Okay.
Appomattox.
I couldn't
Yes.
remember.
Is he
honestly.
standing in the room?
He is
Yeah. So
absolutely.
he's in the
standing
room.
Yeah, that
Yes.
would make sense. Okay, cool.
Yes.
I just wanted
I honestly
to know.
could not remember.
I just wanted to know if he was in the room for Hunter because
Yeah.
that was a pretty vicious firing.
I'm pretty certain Grant is by himself.
I wonder if that was like Hunter's barely even in the room. Like his first foot is across the threshold. He's like,
He
"You're
knows
fired."
what's coming.
He's like, "You're fired. Turn around. Just leave. just leave this
go.
place."
Oh, he didn't know it was coming. He thought things were going to be okay.
No, I know that was why, but I wondered if Grant just did it that mercifully or mercilessly, depending on how you look at it. Just, "You're fired. Get out of here."
Well, just to rabbit hole for a moment, we do see that's actually a really good example of Grant and
Yes.
his trying to be nice to people, even people he doesn't necessarily get along with,
Mm-hmm.
because he tells David Hunter, hey, we're going to bump you up to departmental command, big guy. You're going to be in charge of this whole department. You're just
Joseph
not gonna be
Joffre
in
this guy?
You're just not going to be in charge of the army anymore.
They
Right.
just kicked him up. They
Yes.
promoted him up to get him out of the field.
You're correct. That's exactly what
Well,
they do.
yes, he maneuvers that way throughout the war.
That's what the French
absolutely.
do with Joffre in the First World War. They're like, we gotta do something with this guy, but he's too much of a hero to fire. So promotion out of the
Yep,
field.
absolutely. Yep.
Supreme Allied Commander.
Get out of there. So yeah, Hunter's like,
It
sweet,
works.
I guess. Here you
Well,
go, Phil
yep.
Sheridan.
Hunter knew it. Hunter knew it was up. He wasn't happy about it.
No, sure.
But that's how Grant portrayed it.
Right.
Is, hey, this is a promotion for you. We're going to make you departmental commander. Isn't that great? Just you're not in the field anymore.
Yeah. He's
like,
Sheridan,
thanks.
get to
Yeah.
the job.
Yeah, Sheridan,
Yes.
actually do the job now.
Right.
Yes.
We shouldn't say
absolutely.
that. I mean, Hunter does fine work in the valley for a while. I mean, it's scorched pretty well in certain parts. Loudoun County,
Now,
Fauquier County,
It's
pretty well
diff-
scorched.
It's a different. His actions in the valley are much more against the Confederate infrastructure, except when it comes to except for when it comes to VMI and Governor Letcher's house. He does burn the crap.
Oh,
out of
there. Look,
Yeah.
first of all, I would put all of that in the infrastructure because there's stuff that directly impacts the army, although the food and the industry. But you got to hit some symbolic targets. Send a message.
Right.
Burning the governor's house.
Yeah, that is definitely
Hitting
what Hunter's doing.
VMI.
And VMI, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a big
Yes.
one.
Yeah.
I know all about how to give a
That
middle
was
finger. You've seen me
purposeful.
do that. I know a
Absolutely.
middle finger when
Yeah,
I'm
that
looking
was
at it.
Absolutely a middle finger.
That's why Sherman,
Yes.
when he gets to Columbia, he's like, burn it.
Yeah.
He didn't start that fire either, and you know it.
I know, but you know, I think he goes out of his way to not put that one out more so than the Atlanta fire. All right, let me rephrase my fake Sherman quote. Let it burn.
There you go.
Let it.
I didn't
burn.
start this one, but don't touch it. Abraham Lincoln, General Sherman, 1865. So, just kidding. All right, so are we wrapping up? I don't want to just leave Rawlins just casually mentioning that he dies. So what is, from the time he transitions out of the war into political Grant, in his French, how does that transition go for Rawlins? Is it an instantaneous? He goes right to work after the war with him?
So again, I think it actually lends itself to their friendship as well.
Right.
He stays on staff with Grant, of course. And when Grant becomes president, this is one of my favorite stories about them. When Grant becomes president, at this point, Rawlins believes he should be Secretary of War. He's gone through, he's Chief of Staff. It's sort of the natural progression for him to become the Secretary of War under Grant in his administration. And Grant is very concerned. This point is months before Rawlins dies. Rawlins is very sick. And the understanding at that time of tuberculosis was you got to get out west, you got to get in that dry air, you got to breathe your lungs out. And so he wants to make him department head out west.
Right.
And sends, I believe it's Wilson, out to tell Rawlins, Grant says he's going to make you the Department of the West somewhere, And Rawlins is like, what? No, I think I should be Secretary of War. And so he goes back to Grant and says, well, I told Rawlins, and Rawlins thinks that he should be Secretary of War. And Grant just says, well, then you tell Rawlins he shall be Secretary of War.
Wow.
That's how much he admires him, And I mean,
Even though it's probably going to kill him.
absolutely. That's the only reason he was going to send him out there was to save his life. But if Rawlins wants to be Secretary of War, absolutely, he deserves it. And if that's what he wants, he's coming to be the Secretary of War. Wow. And he's only there for 8 months. He does die.
Does he do anything effective during those 8 months?
Well, that's a little controversial.
Okay.
He strips Sherman of some of his power.
Yeah.
That's another
And
one
actually,
of
it
Grant's
creates a
boys.
little bit of rift between Grant and Sherman.
'Cause those are two dudes who are also very
absolutely,
tight.
Yes,
Right.
they really are. And it really does sort of strip down their relationship a little bit. There's some distrust after that because Rawlins does take some of the powers away from Sherman, who replaces Grant at this point,
Right.
and takes back to the War Department some of the powers that Grant had, and he's not giving Sherman. And Sherman is very upset
Is
about
the
it.
argument that we're not actively at war like that
Yes,
anymore?
it is. And that those military powers don't belong outside of the War Department. At this point, we're not
Outside
at
of
war.
civilian circles.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Sherman's arguments were still at war.
Yeah,
Out west.
pretty much.
Actually,
Absolutely.
he does make that
No,
argument.
I
Yes.
know. I wasn't
Yeah.
joking, but I mean, that's
Yeah,
the
you're right.
simplicity
He
of it.
does. Absolutely. So he does a few things. He does some stuff with Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
Basically his period of his service as Secretary of War is not great. I mean, he does some stuff that really that's actually some of the stuff that fuels into maybe Grant didn't like Rawlins at the end or whatever, because he does this thing with Sherman. He has some sort of maybe under the table relationships with Cuba, some stuff. And
I don't subscribe to that simply because I think most people aren't total jerks. I mean, even people who are jerks aren't like jerks in private when they're by themselves.
absolutely
And like
think
there
so,
are
too.
people in
Yeah.
my life who I detest today, who I do not like, things like that. But I have shared positive memories with in the past, and I will never be dishonest about those things. Like we talk about this a lot. I've been in bands, right? My one band that got pretty successful, there were 5 of us. My drummer, my brother, and I are the only ones that talk. I really can't stand the majority of the rest of them. Maybe Tyler. Shout out Tyler. Our bass player was awesome. But like our singer was a garbage person, but I had good years and things. So
Yeah.
I will never be dishonest about that. So I have a hard time subscribing to the because of the Sherman thing.
I absolutely think so,
I don't
too.
think that would be a reason to keep him out of the book.
No,
maybe,
I don't think so either.
Maybe in the moment there was some
Yep.
riff, but I don't think that negates a lifetime of
Absolutely.
experience.
Absolutely. And again, all these other things that he does,
Yeah.
building the monument to Rawlins, that's
Right.
after that.
Yeah,
taking care of
yeah.
Rawlins's kids, making sure that Rawlins's kids are taken care of when, his second wife who's not the mother of these children, can't take care of them anymore.
Right.
He takes care of them. He moves them. The son goes to West Point, and he does not do well there. He's actually probably epileptic.
Really?
He gets
That's
him out of
interesting.
West Point, and then he actually gets him a job. He takes care of these kids.
Yeah,
He's-
it betrays that
devoted
logic.
to Rawlins,
Yeah, it totally
know?
betrays that
Absolutely,
logic.
yeah. So he's Secretary of War. This is the other thing. Again, I think what's neat about Rawlins is when he dies, he's super popular. People really respect him. They love him.
Big funeral?
Huge funeral. There's a huge military procession. Starts at the War Department all the way down to Congressional Cemetery. It's 200 vehicles, 200 drawn carriages, whatever. There's like 6 gray horses with dressed in black horsemen. The casket is draped and Rollins's white riderless horse is behind, following behind it. It's very dramatic. It's befitting somebody of a huge stature in the government and the public eye, and it's well attended. And
All
he's
right.
buried at Congressional Cemetery.
Add it to the list of things we need to do when we build the time machine. We got to go back and tell Grant to put him in the book.
Yeah,
Put
pretty
him- just
much.
settle all of
Well,
it. Put it in the book.
Honestly, it sounds like we need to go down to Congressional and make a visit.
No,
Yeah.
so here's the second part of that story, though. He's not buried at Congressional Cemetery anymore.
Ah,
So again, understanding that he's well liked and revered in his time period, which kind of makes it so interesting that he's so obscure at this point.
Did they bring him home?
The first DC GAR post is formed in 1866. It is called the John Rawlins Post. And in the 1870s, Congressional Cemetery kind of falls into disrepair. It's not being used for government burials anymore. It doesn't have a lot of stature. And Arlington Cemetery at this point is now being used for, government officials, and it has a little better of a reputation. So that GAR in the mid to late 1890s endeavors to have Rawlins moved from Congressional Cemetery to Arlington Cemetery.
Arlington. Oh.
that late, the 1890s.
1890s,
really?
and
Wow.
he is finally moved in 1899. And
So he rests today in Arlington.
he is in Arlington
30
Cemetery. He's
years
not.
after his passing.
Yes.
Wow.
He's very close to Sheridan at this point. He's just down the hill from the Arlington House, and right by Clemson too.
One day, when I am feeling especially controversial, we will get into the history of the creation of Arlington National Cemetery, and that will ruffle a lot of people's
that
feathers
will.
because
It's a good story, though.
It is
it
a
is.
very good story.
in the simple sense, we could say it right here, right now. People have a hard time accepting the fact that was basically started as a middle finger.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, talking about middle fingers, Arlington Cemetery is the
I mean,
biggest
like
one.
our most hallowed ground in our nation today is like people have this incredible disconnect from how it got started.
Yes,
It was like, cool,
absolutely.
you're gonna rebel, we're gonna put our dead in your lawn.
Yep.
In your favorite guy's lawn.
Right,
Love,
exactly.
Love
Yep.
Montgomery Meigs.
Yep, I know. He's great.
Someday,
He's awesome.
someday we'll get deep into that story.
No, it's a great story. It
all
really
right.
is.
So, Melissa, how does the episode today, the story of John Rawlins, sort of wind down for you? You know, obviously he's with him. He's forgotten in the book inexplicably. We'll never know why, I guess. But
Right.
How do you wrap all of this into a nice little bow? Who is, when it's all said and done, who is John Rawlins? You know, how do you think we should look at him historically, or you wrap it up? put it in a nice bow for us.
Yeah, so a
because
nice
I don't know how to do
bow
that.
Definitely, I think is he was sort of forgotten. But if you really look at Grant's story, and this is again one of the reasons I think the story is interesting, Grant's had a resurgence.
Certainly.
He was forgotten. If you look at Grant's presidency, he did quite a few things of note.
Yeah.
Especially Reconstruction,
Right.
Damn straight.
and they were completely forgotten. The lost cause, theories
and-
about calling Grant a
Right.
butcher, that stuff has stuck, and it has taken years. Recently, some of the biographies of Grant, Chernow's, and I forgot, Simpson's. There was the other one.
It doesn't matter. It's
Ron
Chernow.
White,
We
I
only
think it
want
is.
Chernow.
Yeah.
It's the only guy we want.
Right.
Best author of Grant ever.
Yeah.
Come on the show, Ron.
Jeez.
I'm not. It's
Shameless
4
plug,
seasons in. I'm
shameless plug.
shameless at this point. I don't even care.
But
Come on the show.
some of these have really brought him back into a respectable light, of a light of his presidency was good, his generalship was good, and alongside that, Rawlins has come back into a sort of recognizable position as well.
I mean, you could see
So-
that in the History Channel special on Grant. I mean, that was basically an apology to him,
Absolutely.
which I was grateful for because I think he deserves it. And our friend was a part of that,
Yep.
and we were super proud of that. Avery
Yeah.
Lentz was a ranger at Fredericksburg, Spotsylvania at that time, and was featured as one of the talking heads
Yeah,
on that.
yeah, I saw it.
And as far as young historians, there's not too many people really focusing on Grant, and he's kind of one of the few out there. So
I think he's kind of coming back. He's getting more of his due. There's a new biography of Rawlins that just came out. So James Wilson wrote a biography. It was sort of a deathbed promise that he made to Rawlins when he was dying, that he would write a biography of him. Wilson wrote a lot of biographies.
Right.
But again, by the time he writes the biography of Rawlins, he's a little bitter, about about Grant, honestly. So you have to really take some of what he writes with a grain of salt. There's another really haphazardly written bio of Rawlins that really kind of concentrates on him being the one who kept Grant sober. But if you really relegate it just to that, you're missing so much of
Right.
their relationship and the importance of who Rawlins was and Grant.
he wasn't just his temperance bell. I mean,
Yeah,
that's-
absolutely.
that's
So, yeah, absolutely. So this new biography that's come out, which came out last year, by Al Ottens, it's great, and it's meticulously researched. He did lots of research in Galena. It's a great book, and so
Fantastic.
he's really kind of not. I know he started it before some of these more recent biographies on Grant came out. So there's some people out there now saying, hey, don't forget Rawlins, which
I'm
I think is
happy.
great. Yeah.
That's why we wanted to do this, because honestly, as much as I don't like to give, no shot at you, Jeffrey Sharp, I don't want to give last full measure this is what got me inspired to do it. But I guess, it did. Like, I read that work of historical
Yeah.
fiction while I was sitting on a charter bus one day, and I was like, I would like to know more about this, because this seems very real in the sense that I can feel these characters'
Yes.
emotion. Because obviously in that series, a lot of the expository dialogue is the fictional part, where we don't know what a lot of these conversations necessarily were. But in order to do those well, you really got to understand the dynamic,
Right.
which I think he did well, having studied later. So I'm hopeful that little works like that, if they inspire me, maybe inspire other people, and works
Yeah,
like
me
the
too.
the
Yeah.
presentations you give, and everybody does their little part. And this guy who has a much more critical role in all things considered, will finally get a little spotlight, or a bigger spotlight put on him, because
Yeah.
we all know who he is, but the average Joe, because all
Right.
of us, professional major league citizens, I don't know why. It's because Dana made that joke about being the high paid editor, and I can't stop joking about how famous we're not.
Yeah.
But anyway,
As long as you put the not on the end.
yeah,
of it,
no,
that's
we're not
fine.
famous. If you listen, the 6 people that listen to our show still, thank you so very much. But no, I in seriousness, everybody does their little parts, and obviously I saw a little bit of a presentation you gave recently, and I had already wanted to get you on the show from back when I met you at the fort, and I was like, that's going to be a great conversation to have, because I personally know only the 30,000 foot. He's much more relevant than we know. I know
Right.
that he has this relationship with Grant that's very unique in the war. At the time we're recording this, All Quiet on the Western Front is all the rage right now,
Right,
the
yeah.
third film adaptation. And as I'm watching that, I go back to the one I grew up with in the 70s. And you think, right, there's those few scenes with Ernest Borgnine, who's just an enlisted man, but he's like out dishing on corporals and higher ranking officers. And, who can only get away with that? But guys like Rawlins who can, have a little bit different of a relationship through the lines.
Yes.
So I kind of get those vibes, where the guy he's a major, right? At one point, or
at the end of the war, he's made a major general. He starts off as a captain and then becomes a brigadier general.
Okay. I thought he was a major. Maybe I just forgot the gen part after major.
Yeah, at the end of the war, he's made it a major general.
But either way, he's not outranking Lieutenant General Ulysses S. Grant, and he's telling him what's up a lot more than just every once in a while. And like I enjoy that as a human level.
Sure.
I do too. I think I gave a talk about Rawlins at one point, and I think probably the best wrap up of it was this one guy had wrote a comment to the commentator, and said, "Sounds to me like everybody needs a Rawlins in their life."
I think that's true.
Mine sits across the table from me, and I'm grateful for him every single day. So, Melissa, where can everybody follow along with your work, either on social media or how do people follow along with what you do for HistoryNet?
Sure. I mean, I'm all over historynet.com. I've got an author page up there as well. And of course, all the photos we research are up there. I do a lot of the social media for Civil War Times magazine and America's Civil War magazine. So you should definitely follow both of those as well.
Absolutely
and,
should.
Absolutely. So
as far as Grant and Rawlins, if we wanted to talk a little bit more about him with you, is there a specific campaign that you know better? I got to know these two overland, right, in 64, but obviously in 63 around Vicksburg, they're stagnant and there's a situation. So they have, I guess, a better chance at a documented relationship. Is there a campaign that you are better at talking about, like to talk about, or is more documented between these two men?
I do think I like the Vicksburg campaign because there's so many facets of their relationship that are sparked in that campaign. Military, personal, they have some real friendly interactions at that point, which are kind of documented. I'll just briefly say, I'll tell you one because I think it's fun. Sure. Rawlins gets this horse and he loves this horse. He loves the horse's tail and comes out one morning and his the tail has been chomped off. Probably by a donkey, or something else. And some other...
What a jackass.
But Grant, he's
There you go.
He's excitable. He's just incensed that the horse's tail is gone. He's, being Rawlins, and he's incensed about it. And Grant thinks it's hilarious. And Grant's like, if I ever, Rawlins says, if I ever find out who did this, I'll get him. And Grant's like, okay, it's probably a mule.
It's probably a donkey, dude. Chill
and
out.
every time he would ride behind him, he's kind of laughing at him. So there's a lot of personal stuff there, and. Rawlins meets his second wife during the Vicksburg campaign in the house that they're staying in, and that's kind of a fun story
Grant
too.
would be like, "Hey, John, get your horse to wiggle its tail." Oh.
Yeah, that's it. But that's exactly the kind of relationship that they have. He would do stuff like that.
All right, well, let's do that then. Let's get back together in a couple weeks. Give you some time to maybe put some notes together. But let's take a look at this relationship during the Vicksburg campaign. Because obviously we like to give love to that campaign because everybody, as we know, Matt and I like to playfully take shots that the war was more than just 3 days in July in Pennsylvania.
Right.
There was some big stuff happening along the Mississippi.
Yes.
And so maybe this will be a good chance to take a look at the relationship through the lens of that campaign. I'm really excited now because this is one of my favorite topics. And Vicksburg, we've been dancing around how do we touch on this subject. Maybe this is the best way to do it.
Western theater.
Maybe this is the best way. We start with just a human relationship between two guys in the middle of this major campaign, in the middle of this war. So
that sounds great.
Just like you can follow the HistoryNet, Civil War Times, all on social media, you can follow the History Things podcast on social media by following us at Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube just by searching the History Things podcast. Matt, you can follow him at Matt Borders Books. He's got 20,000 books out by this point of the summer. So make sure you have read all 20,000. The test is on Friday, by the way. Nothing less than 95% will pass, so you better be ready.
Wow.
If you feel like hanging out with me and all my weirdness, you can follow me at History Things with Pat. And you can also follow, if you are interested in some of the music stuff that you've seen teased over the winter, at Old Mally. So I appreciate you guys, as always, tuning in with us. Matt, Pretty sure he appreciates you. I don't know why I'm just doing this joke like you don't care. Matt loves you guys more than I love you, and I love you the most. So,
Wow,
no,
okay.
I'm just kidding. But at the History Things podcast, like we always say at the end of every episode, it's because of you we get to do this show. The 6 of you that download this show every episode, wink, wink, it's way more than 6. And that's why we get to do this for 4 seasons. But in seriousness, we're grateful because you guys keep hitting download, like, share, and you're doing the 5-star ratings like we've been asking. Keep doing that. It helps. And it's been allowing us to get some credibility under our belts and get some really awesome, big names on our show. So, Melissa, thank you so very much for coming all the way to the War Department, the History Things Podcast Studios, and we look forward to hanging out with you in a few weeks. So, for our guest today, Melissa Winn, Director of Photography at HistoryNet, for my co-host, Matt Borders, the co-host with the most, I'm your co-host, Pat McGuire, saying this is the History Things Podcast, and we will catch you all later.
Good night.
You've been listening to the History Things Podcast. Follow the guys on Facebook and Instagram at the History Things Podcast for all the latest news and exclusives. Make sure to also follow Pat and Matt on their social medias at History Things with Pat and at Matt Borders Books. Have a question, comment, or compliment for the show? Send us an email at historythingspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show.